Everyone else, thumbs up, right? I didn't see, or I missed it. Everyone else downloaded it? The
Yes.
IIA standards and the implementation guides? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Ravi, what about you?
Sir,
Did you download it?
yes, sir, I have downloaded it.
Very good. And the next thing which I asked you to do is, after you download it, those 25 pages of this, can I request everyone to go on mute, please? Next thing I had requested was, after you download those 25 pages of standards, go through them in a sequence, right? And as far as implementation guide is concerned, that is also 200 pages, 1000 series and 2000 series onwards, and you should read 2000 onward series standards. Correct? So we had discussed this. So you should have at least, if you've not completed reading all the implementation guides, at least you should have read substantial amounts of it by now. Right? Yes, thumbs up. You don't need to unmute yourself, but when I ask you a question and if the answer is a yes, please give me a thumbs up. If you want to ask something, please raise your hand. There will be times when I'll ask you to unmute yourself because it's very, very weird to talk to a blank screen. Okay. But for the sake of, but to avoid any disturbance, I would mostly ask everyone to just give me a quick thumbs up, and I'll ask you that many times during the call, right? So that I'm just to make sure that everyone's listening. Okay, coming to Mohan, your question. Here are the standards. Okay, if you go here, it says standards and guidance IPPF. This whole thing is IPPF. IPPF is International Professional Practices Framework. Within that framework, you have the standards, you have definition, core principles, code of ethics, implementation guide, and supplemental guidance. All of these five, right, need to be downloaded. And for supplemental guidance, I told you that we don't need to, because there's a lot of supplemental guidance. If there is specific supplemental guidance, then I'll let you know. Right? Everyone? Yes, thumbs up. See, this supplemental guidance is all practice guides, which will tell you how to audit specific areas. Like cyber security response and recovery, what do you need to do? How to build effective internal audit activity in public sector, right? Internal auditor and fraud. What's internal auditors? What's his role when it comes to fraud, right? So all of that is given here, but you don't need this because your current material is sufficient. Okay. I will tell you if there is any specific supplemental guidance to be downloaded. Now let's go to implementation guidance. Here you have the implementation guidance. You have to log in as a member, right? And then you can download it. Is it clear now? Mohan, is it clear?
Yes, Ankur.
Yeah, okay. Keep your finger on the thumbs up button. Okay.
Okay.
Chalo. With this, let's do a Sri Ganeshai Nama of part 2. Okay. What do you have here? You have study unit 1, starting from internal audit operations. Then you have the assurance engagements. What do you mean by assurance engagements? Then you have financial, environmental, and consulting engagements, right? So you have assurance engagements, and then you have financial, environmental, and consulting engagements. So what's the difference between that? Then you have the IIA plan. Once you have the internal audit plan, there is engagement planning, risk assessment, and objectives. How do you determine what are the, how do you plan for that particular engagement? How do you do the risk assessment, and what are the objectives of the assessment? Then you have engagement procedures, staffing, and developing the work program. So for a specific engagement, what are the procedures of going about in that engagement? So that consists of how do you do the planning, how do you do the execution, how do you do the reporting, how do you do the follow-up, right? And everything in between in terms of the challenges that you will face during the engagement and how do you address that. Then it starts breaking down into other aspects, information gathering, everything that we do, right, and all observations that we come up with, or let me rephrase this. In order for us to cover the scope that we have planned properly, we need to gather information, right? Even for planning and engagement, we need to gather information. So information gathering is across risk assessment, planning for the engagement, actual execution. Through all your stages, you need to gather some of the other information. Sampling and statistical quality control. Sampling is a very important aspect of an auditor's job, right? So this particular area covers various aspects of sampling, the key pitfalls when you are selecting samples, what are the different methodologies of sample selection, so all of that. Then you have analysis, evaluation, documentation, and supervision. So how do you analyze the information that you've got? How do you evaluate it? How do you document whatever work that you've done? As an auditor, your work someone should be able to independently verify your work, right? And that can only happen through documentation. Supervision is what? Supervision is a kind of control. Throughout all phases of internal audit, supervision is involved to make sure that we don't we reach our audit objectives, and we don't we adequately mitigate the risk during our audit. There is, like, every processes have risk. Internal audit also has some risk, right? Any examples? What is one of the risks that we face? Yeah, Harini?
Assurance that we give to the organization that
Yeah, so what is the risk? You're right. I mean, you're on the right track, but can you like rephrase this a bit?
May I pitch in?
yeah.
Sorry?
Not giving adequate assurance to the organization, and later if, let's say, we have a fraud, that can be a huge risk.
No, so if you're not giving assurance and then there is a fraud, then that is okay. But unless, I think what you mean to say is it was part of our scope, we gave positive assurance that everything is fine in that area. We've looked at the key risk as per the scope. But later on in that same scope area, there was a fraud. That's what you mean, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, whenever we cover fraud or whenever we come across fraud, I'll talk about that in more detail. But as far as an internal auditor is concerned, he is not responsible to uncover all frauds. That should be clear. Okay. Our responsibility is not to find out all frauds. Our responsibility is to keep in mind that frauds can occur. How can they occur? And then have adequate procedures to cover anti-fraud controls within the processes. Is that clear? The primary responsibility of identifying frauds lies with the management. Our job is to have reasonable procedures, audit procedures, such that if something has gone wrong, there's a reasonable chance that we will find out. There's a reasonable chance that we will identify red flags within that procedure. Okay, so there is this very important distinction that you need to understand. And then finally, communicating results and monitoring progress. So this is clear. From study unit 1 to study unit 10, you are covering the complete execution life cycle of an audit. Okay. These are around, if I take the IIA glossary also into consideration, there's around 330 pages overall, right? And we will cover this in, I think, close to 12 or 15 lectures, which means you have 330 divided by 15. Like every time we will try and close around 15 to 20 pages in all sections, in each section. Okay. On page Roman number 6 and 7, you have the detailed table of contents. So within internal audit operations, what all is covered is given here. Assurance, engagements, all of that. Okay. Now, let's move on. Preparing for and taking the CIA exam. I will not cover this. We covered this in the orientation, right? So please go through it. Let me know if there is any confusion and I'll be more than happy to help you out. So page 1 to 5. 1 to 5. Yes, please go through it and let me know if you have any questions. Has anyone already read it? Yes. Yes, Supriya, good. Any questions?
Hi, Ankur. Like, I didn't read it for part 2, but I've read it already for part 1, and it's the same for both the parts, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
do you have any questions there?
No, not as of now. But if I do, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Perfect. And yeah, 6, 7, 8 also talks about how the material is structured and what's given in. What do you mean by green boxes? Green boxes are performance standards. Blue are interpretation standards. Is basically, if you look at page 7, the one in green is the performance standard. Performance standard is typically the standards which I keep talking about. Standards are divided into 2 parts, right? You have attribute standards and you have performance standards. Attribute standards matlab kya? What do you mean by attributes? Anyone?
Factors, attributes.
Sorry?
Factors.
Factors.
Yeah, attributes like factors which causing the issue or problem.
Okay. Anyone else?
Characteristic.
Characteristics.
So these are characteristics, right? Attributes are characteristics of any subject, like anything. Animate or inanimate object. What are the attributes? Okay, attributes of this person is bald, he's tan, he wears black glasses. Those are my attributes, right? So your attribute standards, which is the whole 1000 series, is covered in part 1. Okay, and then there is some part of performance standard which is also referenced in part 1 of your studies, which is the fundamentals of internal audit. Part 2 is all about execution, and hence execution is what? Performing. So performance standards, all 2000 series are covered here. So 2 types of standards: attribute standards covered in part 1 and performance standards covered in part 2. Okay. Interpretation of standard 2010 is that implementation, interpretation is given under the standard. And when you read the implementation standard, there the interpretation is also covered. So that interpretation is given in blue box, and then you have the implementation standard. So how do you implement it? Interpretation is what's the meaning of this standard. So in this particular case, page 7, if you see, the CAE must establish risk-based plan to determine priorities of the internal audit activity consistent with the organization's goal. So then they will go ahead and explain, okay, what is a risk-based plan? How do you develop a risk-based plan? What do you mean by organization goals? How do you make sure that you're consistent with organization goals? So all that is interpretation of standard. And then implementation standard is how to do it. How to implement this performance standard 2010. Okay. Is it clear how this is structured? Okay, good. Page 8 is just some flowchart and visual. So if you this is basically just to conceptualize the ideas and make the procedures more clear. And here they have given you an example of engagement planning. So how do you do an engagement planning? First, you do a preliminary survey, you identify the risk, you do the risk assessment. Risk assessment means what? What do you mean by assessing? Anyone?
Finding out
Yeah,
the
Ravi.
status.
Finding out the status. Okay. Anyone else?
Understanding the current situation.
Okay.
Understanding and
assess-
calculating, sir.
Yes, calculating. Basically, it is measurement. Right? How serious is this risk? And there can be a range of measurements, right? You could highlight, you could give them numerical ranges. You could say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, this is 5, 5 being the most critical or catastrophic, 1 being minor or low. You could just have some qualitative assessment or measurement saying that this is low, medium, or high risk. Okay. So risk assessment is basically measurement. Then after doing that whole planning and risk assessment part, then you determine the engagement objectives. Why are we doing this internal audit? What are the main objectives that we need to cover? Establish scope to achieve engagement objectives. So what are the boundaries of the engagement? So whenever we are doing, when the objective is to, let's say, if we talk about the procurement process and our objective is to verify whether vendor development process is being followed. by the procurement department? Do you go ahead and audit everything under vendor development, or do you select some key areas? Within vendor development, there will be certain key areas, right? You will be like, okay, vendor development for this XYZ material. Let's say, imagine a company like Hindustan Lever. They have got more than 10,000 products, let's say. Okay. No, actually 10,000 is zyada ho gaya, but you see my point. There are thousands of products, and but there are thousands of raw materials which are being used. Okay. Now, for these key raw materials, there will be vendor development. You will select more than one vendor, you will develop more than one vendor, so that when you want to buy this particular product, you can ask for competitive bids. If one vendor is not able to provide the material, then you can reach out to the other vendor. Things like that. That's why you have vendor development, right? To mitigate the risk of supply chain risk. Correct? Now, you will not look at the vendor development for all of these materials. You will select some, or you will determine that, okay, we are going to look at vendor development for packaging material, or we are going to look at vendor development for food articles, right? And that's one. The second thing is, do you go ahead and look at vendor development for the last 3 years? Or do you keep it open-ended, we'll do vendor development, and whichever period we want to look at, we will look at that. We don't do it this way, right? We select the period for which we are doing it. So what are we doing exactly? We are setting up the boundaries of the engagement. Clear, everyone? Yes, fatafat. So that is the scope to achieve engagement objectives. Establish criteria to evaluate the scope. Determine procedures to evaluate the criteria. Ensure engagement staff and resources are appropriate and sufficient. And then finally, we develop the engagement work program. Establish criteria to evaluate the scope. Means, in order for us to audit the scope, what are the criteria? Whenever we come up with an observation, the management will typically challenge us, who said that? Or what are you referring to? Correct? Yes or no? All of us has come across that situation, right? The point is, which criteria have you referred to cover this scope? So if I have to come up with observations within vendor development process, I might say that, okay, we looked at this particular vendor development policy. Correct. I have looked at this particular regulation, and against that, I am evaluating you. Correct. And then finally, if there is nothing else, but there are certain well-known industry practices, then you will refer to those industry practices, right? But criteria are important. So that's what we are talking about. When there are no documented criteria, then we have to agree on the criteria with management. Okay. But anyways, the point here was, this is the kind of visual that they will use during this material to explain the process or to explain ideas, things like that. Now, remember, while they say this is the kind of visual that you will see, you will not see a lot of visuals. You'll have to make your own visuals. Okay. And when I'm teaching, what I try and do is I try and prepare some visuals so that it becomes easier for everyone to understand what's going on. Okay, so pay attention to those visuals and pay attention to the examples that I'm giving. Okay. Page 9 is time budgeting and question answering techniques for the exam. We've discussed this. We've gone through these pointers. The 9, 10, 11 is all about exam, taking up the exams. I'll not go through that again. But you please go through it again. And it is always advisable to refer to it time and again. Okay, just to keep it fresh in your memory. And if you find anything that jumps out or you're not able to understand or you find it difficult to implement that technique, then do let me know. Okay. Now, let's jump into internal audit operations, page 13. Any questions so far? Are we good? If you have questions,
No questions.
you can raise your hand and ask questions, or you could just type into the chat box. I will check the chat box periodically and then respond to it. Okay. Okay. I see something in the chat box. Okay. This is just observing. Can I forgot to grab some water. Can I do that quickly? Give me like 30 seconds. Okay, so let's look at this internal audit operations. Yeah. So what are the learning objectives of this unit 1? Okay. The learning objectives are describe policies and procedures for planning, organizing, directing, and monitoring of internal audit operations. So we'll learn about that. Interpret administrative activities. So what are the administrative activities that the internal audit department needs to undertake for meeting its objectives? That will be there. And then describe coordination of internal audit efforts with external auditors, regulators, regulatory oversight bodies, and other internal assurance functions, as well as potential reliance on other assurance providers. The organization always is, an organization always has limited resources, right? They have limited time to spend on assurance activities also. It's always in the, it is always advantageous if we collaborate with other assurance providers and reduce the assurance burden, right? So many of you would have interacted with statutory auditors or with other external auditors, and there would be questions coming up that they've already covered this. Do we need to audit this area? Yes or no?
Yes.
Or at least you would have come across a situation where statutory auditors say that, okay, provide us your internal audit reports, show us what you did, things like that, right? Why are they doing this? They are doing this so that they can look at the work that we have already done. And if they are fine with the methodology of how we went about it, then it reduces their effort, correct? And more importantly, it saves time, it saves management some time and effort as well, right? So similarly, internal audit effort should also be coordinated with all of these external and internal agencies to reduce the overall burden on management. Okay, so that's what we are going to learn in this particular unit. Now, introduction to internal audit. So this particular subunit provides a high-level discourse of how IIA activity engages its functions. Okay, and then we will, in the subsequent units, we'll go deeper into each of these components. So let's look at performance standard 2100 to 2100. It says nature of work. Talks about the nature of work. So IIA activity should do what? They must evaluate and contribute to what? What should we evaluate and contribute? We should evaluate and contribute to the improvement of the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. Means we should evaluate the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes, and we should contribute to its improvement. Okay. How should we do that? We should do that, or what tool should we use? We should use systematic, disciplined, and risk-based approach. Okay. Systematic matlab kya? In a certain sequence, such that everything is covered. Right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's a sequence. Right? So you cover everything in a sequence. Discipline means what? You may cover the same step, but sometimes you do, sometimes you may not. Is that okay? That's not okay, right? So, but when you do it regularly, that is discipline. Risk-based approach. Risk-based approach means focusing on areas which are the most risky. Now think about the time you were in school, or let's say college, right? There were some kids who were very systematic and disciplined, right? They would be like, every day maths 1 hour karunga, then I will do science, then I will do English, then I will do this, right? So that's and then I will make sure after I study, I will do the homework. After I do the homework on the weekends, I will test myself. That is systematic. Then they would do it every day without fail. That is discipline. And then there were some smart students who would go one step further. They would not only do this, but they would focus on areas where they were not confident, or they were not confident, or they knew that ye to aayega hi. Or in the past 10 years, this has always been asked, right? So there was a risk there that if you don't do this particular area properly, and if the examiner asks any questions from here, I might not be able to respond properly, or I might lose marks there. So what are you doing? You are focusing on those areas which are risky for you. And then for those areas, you are then saying that, okay, you know what? Saturday, Sunday go to I will study this only. Father is also at home, so I'll ask him about it as well. And I will do better. So what is he doing? What is the student doing? He's focusing on the risk areas and not on all areas. Is it clear, everyone? Similarly, internal auditor should also be systematic, disciplined, and have a risk-based approach. And why a risk-based approach? Because you don't have time for covering anything and everything, right? Your time is limited, resources are limited, so the focus should be on covering the key risk areas. Internal audit credibility and value are enhanced when auditors are proactive and okay. First, do you see how I am reading this material? Everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Those who are new, at least Harini, Ravi, it's not just plain reading of the material, right? The internal audit activity must evaluate and contribute to the improvement of the organization's work. Like if you read like this for 10 times, you may remember the sentence, but you will not
Yeah.
understand the concept. Okay. So you have to break it up and then deliberate on it. Spend some time thinking the way I was thinking loudly. Okay. The internal audit must evaluate and contribute. What should he do? He must. Okay, this is compulsion. This is not should. There is a difference between should and must. Must is must. You have to do it. Should is ideally you should do it, but there can be scenarios, valid scenarios where you may not do it. That's the difference between must and should. And throughout the material, you will see that for certain things, they say must. For certain things, they say should. So pay attention to it, right? So what should the internal auditor do? Must do. He should do two things. He should evaluate the GRC, which is governance, risk management, and control. And he should contribute to its improvement of GRC again. And what tools should he use or how should he do it? He should do it using a systematic, disciplined, and risk-based approach. Okay. So are we going to study like this? Yes, everyone? Okay. And the more we read, the more we cover this material, you will get into, hopefully you will get into that habit along with me. Right? Jab aap bhi padhoge, you will also start reading it. And trust me, reading 20 pages, 25 pages, just like that as a novel and reading 3 pages the way we are doing right now is a huge difference. There's a huge difference between the two. Okay? Because deliberate reading and breaking up things into portions and really digesting them is much more helpful. It's like food, right? If you chew it properly, then you are able to absorb all the nutrients. But if you are just going to gulp it, you are not going to get the nutrients. So ये वैसा ही है. You have to really chew the concepts here because they are going to ask you from different angles. They may ask you, okay, internal auditors, evaluation and contribution. No, they may ask you, okay, internal auditors, the nature of internal audit work is such that the internal audit activity must evaluate and contribute to, and I'm giving a very simplistic answer, right? Question to governance activities, risk management activities, risk assessment activities, and control processes, let's say. They may say must not or something of that sort. So you have to remove the odd one out or you have to mark the odd one out because they have to evaluate and contribute to governance, risk management, and control processes. The fourth option that they may give is organizational budget, let's say. Correct? So that's the odd one out. So that is only when you remember that, okay, only when you've understood that, what does the internal auditor activity do? They evaluate and contribute to governance, risk management, and controls, not to budgeting of an organization. Will you be able to mark the right answer? And this was a very simplistic one, but as you will see later on in some of the examples, these questions are very, very conceptual. They are not like this, okay, yaad rakho, governance, risk and management and control, governance, risk management and control, right? It's not like that. You'll come to know when we go through the questions. Anyway, so now nature of work, how internal audit activity brings meaningful impact. So first is your, wait a minute. What I do is, let me pull up the implementation guides. Yeah, let's just go to (2000) series. Okay. Because in this particular chapter, they have covered this. So let's go there. Okay. Performance standard. Okay. To make sure that you read these standards, 2000 wala. Okay, starting from this. So when you are reading this particular topic, make sure that you read this standard 2000, managing the internal audit activity. Okay. Now, if you look at this, nature of work, how internal audit activity brings meaningful impact. Starting with the IIA lays out the order of operations for internal audit activity in the implementation guide 2100, which is the nature of work. First of all, the definition of internal audit activity, internal auditing as a subject is important, because that also tells you what is it that we are supposed to do. What does our, what is internal auditing all about, right? So the definition goes as follows. The internal audit activity, it helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control. So the performance standard 2001 talks about the nature of the work. It's also covered in the IIA's definition of internal audit, that what is it that internal auditors are supposed to do. Now, in the next next paragraph, we cover the definitions of governance, risk management, and control. So if you look at governance, what is it? It's a combination of processes and structures implemented by the board to inform, direct, manage, and monitor the activities of the organization. So what is governance? Governance is two things. It is processes and structures. Processes means what? How are things going to be done, right? Structures is what? What should be the organization structure so that these activities are done, right? So you have things to be done, how they need to be done, and what kind of an organization structure is needed to make sure that these activities are done, right? Who is creating this? It is implemented by the board. Okay. And why is that? They have this combination of processes and structures to do the following: to inform, direct as in do this, do that, right? To direct people. Inform means give that information. Manage means what? To make changes as necessary to meet the objectives. And monitor the activities of the organization toward achievement of its objectives. That is governance. Okay. Why is monitoring required? Monitoring is required to make sure that you are reaching, the organization is reaching its objectives. Every organization is in existence for a purpose. There are certain objectives which need to be achieved. And the board is the one who sets up processes and structures such that they are able to inform, direct, manage, and monitor the activities of the organization. Why? So that the organization can meet the or achieve the objectives of the organization. Clear, everyone? Yes? Okay. Now, what is risk management? So risk management, so you have governance, which is combination of processes and structures to inform, direct, all of that. What is risk management? Now, risk management is a separate process to identify, assess, manage, and control potential events or situations to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievements of the organization's objectives. Okay. So what does this process do? Within risk management, you are identifying the risk. Then what are you doing next? You are assessing. Assessing means what? Measuring. We covered that, right? So measuring the risk. Then you are managing the risk. What is managing the risk? Whenever you face a risk, either you can transfer that risk, you can stop doing the activity altogether so that the risk does not arise. If you don't, sorry, if you, someone just messaged me on Teams and I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, we were at managing the risk, right? Whenever you face a risk, for example, let's talk about your CIA exams. There's a risk, right? The risk is, what is the risk? The risk is you may fail in this exam. Correct? How do you deal with this risk? What are the ways to deal with this risk that you may fail in this exam? So if someone tells you, "Arey, there's a risk you may fail in this exam," how do you deal with this risk?
Plan properly, prepare, evaluate ourselves where we are weak and then focus on that area.
Okay. Okay. What else?
Practice.
Yeah, someone else?
Having all chapters covered and having 100% preparation.
Okay. So what you guys are suggesting is basically, okay, study hard and cover the areas, vagera. There are other ways also, right? Not taking up the exam is also managing the risk. Correct, na? If you don't take up the exam, then you are avoiding the risk altogether. Correct? But that's
the
also a
objective-
strategy. But the objective will not be met.
Right.
Correct? The other thing is sharing the risk, right? Or transferring the risk. Sharing the risk, let's say Simandhar tomorrow says that, okay, you know what? If you don't pass in the first attempt, we'll refund all your money. Right? That is a transfer of risk. At least a financial risk. Time and effort we will lose, that's a different thing. But at least the financial risk is covered. So risk management is, how do you manage the risk? Do you avoid it? Do you accept it? Do you transfer it? Do you share it? That's all risk management. That's all risk management. Sorry. That's a risk response. Risk management is identifying, assessing, managing, controlling the potential events. So risk management is a more holistic term What we were talking about is a risk response. How do you deal with a risk? These are the different ways in which you can respond to a risk. Okay. And why do you do all of this? To provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the organization's objectives. Can the management provide absolute assurance that if we've done the risk management, then we will meet the objectives? No, right? Management cannot provide absolute assurance that if risk management is done, we will meet the organization's objectives, because there may be certain external factors which may occur, which may lead to not achieving the organizational objectives, right? They can provide reasonable assurance. Okay. Finally, control. Any action taken by management, the board, and other parties to manage risk and increase the likelihood that established objectives and goals will be achieved. Management plans, organizes, and directs the performance of sufficient actions to provide reasonable assurance that objectives and goals will be achieved. Correct? So, in case of a company where, let's say, in case of a procurement department, the objective is to get the best possible. One of the objectives is to get the best possible quality required to achieve the kind of quality parameters that you have set for your product. Right? Now, in order to do that, management will do certain things. Management will set up a quality assurance department. They will set up policies, procedures, okay, how this quality assurance department will function. They will determine the list of reports which this QA department should prepare and provide. Right? All of this is what? These are controls which management has implemented to increase what? The likelihood of achieving the objective of good quality. Clear, everyone? So any action taken by management, the board, and other parties to manage risk and increase the likelihood that established objectives and goals will be achieved, that's a control. Okay? Control processes. The policies, procedures, both manual and automated, and activities that are part of control framework, designed and operated to ensure that risks are contained within the level that an organization is willing to accept. Now, couple of things. Your procedures are both manual and automatic. When your purchase order gets approved through a set of workflows within the system, within SAP system or Oracle system, that's an automated procedure, right? Then you have a procurement policy or a strategic sourcing group policy, right? That's the policies. The procedures is the purchase order will get approved as per the workflow which has been configured in the system. And activities that are part of a control framework, designed and operated to ensure that risks are contained. Why do you have this mechanism? I have a policy which says that this is what the management intends, this is the way the approval should function. Then you have an automatic system where that approvals are configured, correct? That makes your control. You should not only have a good design, but it should be operated properly. Design means what? Design means, think about a bike, for example. A bike has a handle at a good height, correct? It has got two wheels. It has got guardrails, lights, rear view mirrors, proper seats, all of that, right? The objective is what? The objective is safety, comfort, aesthetic design, things like that. Now, if you if you come across a particular bike where one handle is large, the other one is short, correct? Then what are you going to say? The design is not proper. Yes? Now you come across another bike where the design is proper. And you buy a bike from a particular shop. And for some weird reason, let's say in the first month itself, the handle of the bike falls off the bike. Right? Means it has not, what does that mean? It has not operated effectively. So design was fine. But when it comes to operations, this one failed. Is it clear to you? Difference between existence and being operating effectively. Operating effectively means the control as designed works that way regularly. When you say the control is not designed properly means the design or the way, the way it is supposed to be designed to meet the objectives, that itself is a problem. Correct? So let's say if the bike design itself is incorrect, then are you going to and you ask the company guy, yeah, what is this? No, this is the way it is designed. If this is the way it is designed, will you say that, okay, yeah, you know what? Let me go to another store and check for the same bike? You will not, right? Why? Because it is designed like this. Kahin bhi jao, you will get the same design. So the design needs to be fixed first. So those of you, and I believe all of you, most of you come from the internal audit department. And sometimes you come across some observation where, let's say, the bank reconciliation statement is not prepared at all. Sometimes they may prepare it, but they don't have a process as such of preparing bank reconciliation statement. So when you're writing up an observation, you do write that, bank reconciliation statements are not prepared, right? Do you go ahead and select samples in that particular case? Yeah, I couldn't hear you. Guys, are you with me? Everyone?
Yes, Ankur.
Yeah. So
Yes.
Harini, you were saying something.
Yeah, I
said
was
you
saying
came-
no, we will not check because the test of design is a failure.
Exactly. So where a test of design itself is a failure, then you will not go ahead and select samples, right? Because meaning ही नहीं है उसका. If the design itself is a problem, then you first have to fix the design. There's no question of looking at samples and stuff like that. So control processes are designed and operated to ensure that risks are contained within the level that an organization is willing to accept. Willing to accept means what? this is the amount of risk that I'm willing to accept. So if I have to take another example of, let's say, pollution norms, and let's say 200 cubic meters of carbon dioxide emission or sulfur emission a month is allowed as per statutory guidelines, as per the law. And the kind of controls that I need to put in place should be such that it limits the emission to 200 cubic metric, whatever, 200 cubic meters. Correct? So the controls are designed and operated such that the pollution emissions are contained within 200 cubic meters. Why? Because that will lead us to meet the regulatory objective. Clear to everyone? Ravi, I'll come to you. Clear to everyone? If your control is such that it allows for more than 200 cubic meters of emissions, then that's not a proper control, right? Okay. Yes, Ravi, go ahead.
Sir, a small doubt. Like this, budgetary goals of a company fits in only in governance, not in control. You mean to say?
Oh, you're talking about that example that I gave you earlier.
Not exactly. In this GRC definition, governance, risk management, and control, and here the controls we are talking about only the like regulatory or some stipulated norms we have to.
No. I'm just giving you an example. I'm
Okay.
giving you an example. Control processes any action taken by management.
Yeah.
Control processes the policies and procedures and activities. So it's not just regulatory.
Okay.
Okay.
So like, for example, a company, like any organization has some budgetary goals. So it will try to reach those goals with some certain actions. So those planning or those levels covers only under the governance activity here.
No, it is a control. No? It's covered under control.
Okay.
See, when you prepare a budget, budget itself is a kind of control.
Okay.
Right? Budget itself is a kind of control. Now, why are you so what is your goal? Let's say, for example, procurement or let's say sales, for example, right? Sales goal is to meet the sales numbers, right? So first you are setting up a sales budget.
Yes.
Why are you doing that? So that you can meet the sales numbers that you aspire for. So budgetary control itself, budget is itself a control, right?
Okay.
And then within sales, how the sales commissions will be paid, how customers will be approached, what will be the marketing activities, right? Or the sales activities, sales commission, all of that will be various controls towards meeting that objective.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Got it.
Yeah. The CAE interviews the board and senior management about the responsibilities of each stakeholder for these processes. So the chief audit executive does what? He talks to the board. He talks to the senior management also about their responsibilities with respect to governance, risk management, and control. Okay. Ordinarily, the board is responsible for guiding governance processes, and senior management is responsible for leading risk management and control processes. Now, here's what I want you to do. You create an Excel sheet or you create a, or you take a piece of paper, whatever works for you. On the left-hand side, you will list down the task. And on the right-hand side, you will have columns. You will have the following columns. You will have board/audit committee. Then you will have senior management. You will have management. You will have internal auditors. External auditors also. Okay. Clear? I'll give you like 15 seconds to pull up that kind of a list. Okay. Now on the left-hand side, you write down guiding governance processes. And who is responsible? So under board and audit committee, you tick there. Clear, everyone? Okay. Leading risk management and controls processes. Okay. On the right hand side, you tick under senior management. Evaluating, assessing and evaluating governance, risk management and control processes. On the right hand side, you tick against internal audit. Clear hai? Everyone? It's very important to know who has which responsibilities. There'll be a bunch of questions in the exams where they will test your understanding of the responsibilities of different constituents of the company, especially what is senior management's role, what is board's role, what's the role of internal audit, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, understanding of the business is also necessary, and established frameworks may be used in the auditor's evaluation. To acquire this understanding, CA will ordinarily review the organization's mission, strategic plan, key objectives, related risks and controls, and the minutes of the board. So, in order for us to understand, in order for us to carry out our scope of work, what do we need to know? We need to understand, first of all, business, what the business is all about, right? What are the objectives of this department? Until and unless you determine the objectives of the department, how can you determine the risk? There has to be a context, right? Now, I will reach, let's say, I will reach Pune in I did not plan my Pune trip properly, so I will reach in 5 hours. That can be a risk only if I want to reach Pune in 3 hours, or only if I'm traveling to Pune, correct? If that's not my objective, if my objective is not to reach in 3 hours, then there is no risk. It doesn't matter whether I reach in 5 hours or 6 hours. Are you getting me? So for me to determine what is a risk and then what is a control, first thing for me as an internal auditor to determine is what is the objective. Because without an objective, The relevance of the objective is very, very important to determine the risk. Right? The context is very important. So understanding of business is necessary, and established frameworks may be used in auditors evaluation. When you say established framework, means there are various frameworks for internal control. You have COSO, you have COBIT, you have Turnbull, and there are these various frameworks. What does a framework do? A framework basically gives you a structure within which to operate. Right? So if there are certain frameworks, then against those frameworks, you can do your assessment that as per this framework, these components are missing. So understanding of the business and established frameworks may be used in internal auditors evaluation. Now, how do you get that understanding? You get that understanding through by understanding the organization's mission, strategic plan, key objectives, related risk and controls, and the minutes of the board. When you read all of this, and when you determine the key objectives, related risk and controls, will you understand the business properly? Okay. After discussions with the board and senior management, the CAE may document in the IIA charter the roles and responsibilities of the board, senior management, and internal audit activity. So, after there's an internal audit charter, internal audit charters are typically listed out on the websites. Okay, so if you just type internal audit charter on Google, you will come across many internal audit charter documents which are publicly listed. You can read any of that. There's also an internal audit charter sample on the IIA website. Okay, so the charter basically lays out the responsibilities of the organization, I mean the management, senior management, board, and clearly specifies the responsibility and the authority of the internal auditor also to meet the internal audit goals. Okay, so after the internal auditor has discussed with the board and the senior management about GRC, they will list out those roles and responsibilities in the internal audit charter. Now, why do I need to do that? I need to do that so that there is clarity about the roles and responsibilities and the expectations from internal auditor. Okay. Now, when determining the strategy for assessing governance, risk management, control, what does the CAE consider typically? He will consider the maturity of these processes, the seniority of the persons responsible, and the organization culture. So if I have to assess governance, risk management, and control, how can I assess this? I need to assess it against the maturity of the organization, complexity of the businesses, right? I need to understand what sort of people are involved, what is their seniority, what's the organization culture. Against that, I can do this assessment that whether they have proper governance, risk management, and control in place. This is a very loaded sentence. So just stay with me. We will cover it aage jaake, not now. Okay. Internal auditors may use their knowledge, experience, and best practices to provide observation and weaknesses and recommendations. So that's what we do, right? As part of internal audit, we use our knowledge, experience, and the best practices to identify observations, to cover our scope first of all, then identify observations, and then provide recommendations also. Now, in addition to observation of weaknesses and recommendation, we should always be mindful of compliance also. Now, what is compliance? It's defined in the IIA glossary. Adherence to policies, plans, procedures, law, regulations, contracts, or other requirements. So you have to verify whether the organization is compliant with in relation to these aspects. Now, there is mention of the IIA glossary at multiple places. The IIA glossary is given on page 349. No, not 349 yet. 319. Make sure that you read this glossary. Okay, clear? It explains the key phrases which are used in this material. And it's very, very important that that glossary is clear to you and you understood what each phrase means. Did you check it out on 319? Guys?
Yes.
Yeah, so make sure that you keep it handy. If you want, you should take a printout of these pages so that you can read it whenever you're traveling or something like that. But make sure that that is absolutely clear to you. Okay. The compliance is very, very important. You should keep that in mind. Then, reasonable assurance. Governance, risk management, and control processes are adequate if management has planned and designed them to provide reasonable assurance. If you see this, the IIA uses the term adequate and sufficient interchangeably. Okay. Which means there is a slight difference between adequate and sufficient. Okay. But the IIA uses it interchangeably. Adequate also means sufficient, sufficient also means adequate. Okay. The control processes, risk management, governance are adequate if management has planned and designed them to provide reasonable assurance. Means if someone says, oh, your governance processes are not okay. Not okay matlab kya? They are not okay. They are not designed such that they provide reasonable assurance. If someone says that the controls are not designed to give 100% guarantee that koi fraud nahi hoga or everything will work exactly the way it should. Correct? Does that mean the governance, risk management and control framework is improper? No. It does not mean that it is not adequate. Because it should give you reasonable assurance. The governance, risk management, and control processes should give you reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. They cannot give absolute assurance. Let's say you're traveling from Bombay to Pune, right? And you meet an accident. If you meet an accident, will your parents start scolding you immediately? They will not, right? What will they look for? They will check whether you've taken reasonable precautions. Did you strap your belt? Right? Seat belt. Did you go under 80 kilometers? Did you make sure that the car is properly maintained? It was checked before you took on that journey. Right? You are not playing loud music. You are not talking on the phone. They will check for all of these things. Na? They will check all these controls, right? Yes or no? समझ में आ रहा है? Thumbs up. Does this assure that you'll never meet an accident? No, because there can be external factors which may lead to an accident, right? But as long as control processes are such that they give you sufficient, if they give you reasonable assurance, then these processes that you have in place are sufficient. Clear, everyone? Clear, na? Okay. So governance, risk management, control processes are adequate. When are they adequate? If management has planned and designed them such that they provide reasonable assurance of achieving the organizational objectives efficiently and economically, then they can be considered reasonable. Then they can be considered adequate. Efficient performance accomplishes objectives in an accurate, timely, and economical fashion. And what is economical performance? It accomplishes objectives with minimal use of resources proportionate to the risk exposure. So efficient means kya? Efficient means you've done it correctly, you've done it on time, and you've done it economically. You've not incurred disproportionate cost as against the benefit that you have derived. If you've done things this way, then you have performed efficiently. When someone says, oh, you performed economically, means what? You've stayed within the budget and used minimal resources proportionate to the risk exposure. Correct? Now, let's say the risk of water contamination. If you travel to Bombay or if you're traveling to India from outside, is very, 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 very slim, let's say, for the sake of argument. Okay. If someone says that someone starts importing Fiji water, 1,000 rupees a bottle, and starts drinking it, then what will you tell them? That it is not economical, right? Because you will say that this is not economical because the cost that you are incurring against the risk is significantly high. Clear hai? Yeah. So your economical performance accomplishes objectives with minimal use of resources proportionate to the risk exposure. Reasonable assurance is provided if the most cost-effective measures are taken in the design and implementation of controls to reduce the risk and restrict expected deviations to a tolerable level. Now, if your mom and dad says ki nahi, you know what, you're traveling to Pune, so we will send 4 bodyguards with you, right? And you will travel in an armored vehicle. Is it cost effective? Is it proportionate to the risk that you are facing? No, na? Everyone agrees? It is not, right? So, what is the risk tolerance is also important. If Anant Ambani is traveling by road and Reliance deploys escort of vehicles and security and all of that, is that proportionate to the risk exposure? It is, right?
Yes.
Correct. So what is the risk exposure and what is your risk appetite? That also determines the kind of controls that you put in place. And that also determines what is economical, non-economical. Something happens to him, then the company is in jeopardy, right? The future of the company is in jeopardy. So that the risk is significant. Against that, this cost is minimal. Okay. Acha, now it's 8:36. Let's take a 5-7 minutes break. Have coffee, tea, whatever you want. A break and then come back and continue. Okay. Okay. So what are we covering next? So that is reasonable assurance. Auditors never give absolute assurance. Management can also never give absolute assurance. Okay. Okay. Controls are adequate if they provide reasonable assurance. Okay. But yes, depending on the kind of operations, the risk appetite may be low. Still, absolute assurance to koi nahi de sakta, but risk appetite can be low. For example, if you think about SpaceX launches, right, or any rocket launch for that matter, can they give absolute assurance that the rocket will launch properly? They cannot, right? For that matter, even when a pilot is flying a plane, can you get absolute assurance that nothing will happen? No. Is the threshold for risk very, very low? Is the risk appetite very, very low? The answer is yes. Correct? There is very low threshold for any errors in these cases. Are you getting me? Yes or no? है ना? Rocket launch mein there is very, very low threshold of making any mistakes. Right? So my risk threshold is very, very low. If my risk threshold is very, very low, then I will have very, very stringent controls about the launch. Correct? Okay. Now let's look at basic types of internal audit engagements, assurance and consulting services. So there are two things that we do within internal audit activity. When they say internal audit activity, what they mean is the department. Okay? So internal audit activity does two things. They provide assurance services and they provide consulting services. So if you look at the definition also, internal auditing is a independent objective assurance and consulting activity. Okay. There are separate implementation standards for assurance services and separate for consulting services. So when we come there, we'll talk about it in more detail. But as an internal audit operation activity, there are two things that we do. We give assurance and we give consulting. And there's a difference between the two. We'll come to that difference later. Okay. And then finally, what do? we do reporting. Reporting completes a feedback loop to management and board, and it provides assurance about governance, risk management, and control. Periodic reports are made on the internal audit's purpose, authority, responsibility, and performance. So now, if you go back and you look at page 14, 15, 16, and 17, what essentially we have done here is that we have broken up the performance standards and we have discussed different aspects of the internal audit definition. What do? We help organization accomplish its objectives. How? Through evaluating, improving governance, risk management, and control process. So what is governance, risk management, and control? Right? That has been explained. We do all of this and provide what kind of assurance? Reasonable assurance. So that is explained. And by doing which kind of services? Assurance and consulting services. And finally, once we do that, we provide a report. So they've explained the whole nature of work, and then they have broken it up into parts. Just if you are thinking about कि यार हम कहाँ आ गए, क्या discuss कर रहे थे, कहाँ आ गए, these are separate concepts. So I'm just tying it out for you totally. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes, no?
No.
Let's go to page 18. We're covering the internal audit administrative activities. So who is responsible for managing internal audit activity? Resources. Pull out that Excel sheet that we prepared. और वहां पे लिखो. Managing internal audit activity resources. And on the right hand side, have a column CAE. And उसके अंदर टिक कर देना. ठीक है? Like any well-managed department, the IIA activities should operate effectively and efficiently. We discussed that, na? Effectively क्या होता है, efficiently क्या होता है, right? Thus, the CA is ultimately responsible. And let's say, what is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency? Never just read and go ahead and assume that, oh, मुझे पता है क्या है. Efficient and effective. Difference.
Effective is reaching the goal, like
Yes. And
doing what
efficient
we
is?
intended to do. Efficient is that
Efficient is the
optimally.
cost that you have incurred.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
So important है. ऐसे ये सब plain reading नहीं कर लेने का. Efficient and effective आगे बढ़ा. हाँ, theme. क्या होगा ना if you just do a plain reading, and then when in the exam they ask you a question, they'll ask you questions like, okay, this particular, there's a risk exposure of $5,000. Management determined that decided to implement a machinery of XYZ, which is significantly costlier than the risk impact. So $5,000 नहीं बोलेंगे, let's say they say $50 का, they found a $50 issue, right? In millions of dollars worth of transaction, and now they decided to implement a significant costly machinery. As a result, there's no further error found. You see the example? So they have not talked about effective, they have not talked about efficient. But only when you've understood the meaning of effective and efficient will you realize that they have been effective, but they haven't been efficient. So this is not the best way of going about it because the cost is significantly more than the perceived benefit. See my point? Yes. ऐसे casually मत पढ़ लो. Every word has a meaning. Yes, I can repeat efficiency and effectiveness. Let's say you have to reach your friend's wedding. Where do you stay, Harini?
Hyderabad.
Sorry?
Hyderabad.
Hyderabad. Okay. Your friend's wedding is in Bangalore. Hyderabad to Bangalore कितना time लगता है पहुंचने में?
10 hours.
Sorry?
10 hours.
10 hours? Oh, I didn't know this is so far. Okay. चलो 10 hours लगते हैं. ठीक है? And कैसे? I'll just take a very stupid example. Okay. Now 10 hours लगते हैं and you have to go to a marriage of a distant colleague, someone in the office, not very close to you, but someone in your office. The objective is to reach there on time. Okay.
Okay.
So, if you don't reach there, there's not a significant risk. Means you hardly meet him anytime. Even if you don't go, it is okay. But you take a business class flight and travel to Bangalore,
Okay.
right? So you reach there on time, well before time. The marriage starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. You reach there at 8, let's say. So were you effective? You reached there, right? On
Yes.
time. So you were effective.
Mm.
Were you efficient?
No, there's amount involved in it. So it was not.
No, amount is involved. Amount is involved. That's fine. If you would have gone by train, you would have reached in time also, right? So that's fine. But you were not efficient about it, right? You incurred a significant cost, a cost which is much higher than the perceived risk that you are trying to mitigate.
Okay.
So that's the difference. Clear hai?
Yes.
Okay. Chalo. Great. So efficiency and effectiveness में ये difference है. You may be effective, but you may not be efficient. So you have to be both efficient and effective. And CA is ultimately responsible for the administrative activities of the internal audit activity. How can he accomplish this? How can he be efficient and effective? He can do that through proper planning, which includes what? Budgeting and human resource management. Okay. Let's look at the standard. The CA must, it's not an option. The CA must effectively manage the internal audit activity to ensure it adds value to the organization. Okay. And what is value and वो सब आगे cover होगा. But for now, think just hear me out. This is the performance standard. It says he must effectively manage the internal audit activity, because if he manages internal audit activity, he will add value to the organization. Now let's interpret that standard. When can you say he has effectively managed the department? You can see that it is effectively managed when the department has achieved the purpose and responsibility that is given in the internal audit charter. Right? The internal audit charter gives the roles and responsibilities of the organization. If I manage my department properly, and if I achieve those roles and the purpose and responsibility which has been laid out in the internal audit charter, then I can say that I met my, and then I can say that I have effectively managed the department, right? Because the reason for why this department exists, that has been achieved. But is that sufficient? No. Let's say I provide reasonable assurance to management. I cover all my scope of work. But I don't conform with the standards. I don't do it the way the internal audit standards have been laid out. Right? Then can I say I am effective? No. Just because you covered the scope, but you did not maintain documentation, let's say, or you did not have a quality assurance and improvement plan in place. Right? Then I cannot again say that I effectively managed it. Okay. So I followed the standards, I achieved the purpose and responsibility, but I did not conform to code of ethics and the standards. Then can I go ahead and say that it has been effective? No, I cannot, right? There's a code of ethics which says what's required, what's not. Objectivity, it talks about objectivity, independence, all of that. So I need to make sure that I follow the code of ethics. Code of ethics of the IIA. Okay? Code of ethics of the company you will anyways follow as in the role of an employee. But in the role of an internal auditor, you have to follow the code of ethics of your profession. So that's what they are talking about. And finally, I can say I've effectively managed the department if I have considered trends and emerging issues that could impact the organization. If I have not considered that, then how can I say that I've managed it effectively? So for example, let's say I've been made the head of internal audit for a e-commerce company. Okay. And as part of that, there is this emerging risk of fraud using payment wallets, right? Google Pay or Paytm or some other payment mechanism. There is this emerging trend of fraud occurring using these payment wallets. Now, if I am not considering these trends and emerging issues in my audit, can I say that I effectively manage the department? The answer is no. You see my point here? Everyone? I would suggest that you make notes. मतलब detailed notes बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. But these examples that I give you, at least you can write it down here somewhere. Okay. Okay. The IIA activity adds value to the organization and its stakeholders. When it considers how do I add value? I can add value to the organization and its stakeholders when the department has considered strategies, objectives, and risk. First, I need to do what? I need to understand the strategies. I have to consider the strategies. I have to consider the objectives. And then I have to consider the risk which can derail those objectives. Stop the organization from reaching their objectives, right? That's the first thing that I need to do as internal auditor. Then what do I need to do? Then I have to constantly take steps to offer ways to enhance GRC. Governance, risk management, and control processes help in meeting the organization objectives. So first, I have to consider those strategies, objectives, and risk. Then I have to make sure that the GRC which the management has implemented to meet these objectives and these strategic goals, those are working, right? And those provide objective and provide relevant assurance, right? So I have to offer ways to enhance governance, risk management, control processes, and objectively provides relevant assurance. And I provide relevant assurance that these things are working. Then I can say I've added value. Clear? So I have a rule.
Sorry,
I have to
Ankur.
provide. Yeah, bolo.
Sorry, which page are you reading? Because I have 2022 edition. So I think what you are reading, it is going in a different direction.
Page 18 pe hai, but
What is the subject?
it is interpretation of
headline.
standard 2000. So whichever version, it is internal audit administrative activities. You have performance standard 2000, and under that there's a blue box called interpretation of standard 2000. So whichever page that is appearing on for you,
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Okay. So adding value means what? Okay. It means that I have considered strategies, objectives, and the risk of the company. I understand the company properly. I know what is their strategy. I know what is the objectives, and I know what are the risks which can derail or which can stop the company from meeting those objectives, right? First, I need to know that. Then I assess all the GRC components to make sure that to find out whether this can prevent the risk from happening. Correct? And I'm able to provide reasonable assurance. If I'm able to do that, then I have added value. Okay. The CAE must establish policies and procedures to guide the internal audit. Then there is performance. So performance standard 2000 talks about managing internal audit activity. How do I effectively manage internal audit activity? 2040 says policies and procedures honi chahiye to guide the internal audit activity. Okay. Responsibility for IIA administrative activities. We already mentioned CAE is responsible for establishing the following administrative activities. These are not all inclusive. There can be more administrative activity. But what are these administrative activities? So they've given some examples, which is design and implement the policies and procedures to provide reasonable assurance that I as a head of audit have sufficient personnel with the qualification, competence, capabilities, and commitment to perform IIA engagement. So that's my administrative responsibility. Na? What are the other? I need to allocate the resources which can be used most effectively. Communication of the activities and engagement findings to the applicable stakeholders. Preparing and monitoring time budgets. Okay. And conducting IA personal evaluations, means their performance evaluations, to determine whether they have knowledge, skills, competence of the staff, training needs, do I require external resources, compensation adjustment. These are all my, as a head of audit, these are all my administrative activities. But these are not comprehensive. There can be other activities as well, which I, as an internal audit head, may be responsible for. Can you think of some other examples of administrative activities of head of audit? Anyone? Bolo, bolo. Designing training programs, right? And facilitating external training. Correct? Participating in company initiatives without loss of independence. These can be other administrative this thing, right? Yes. कोई कुछ बोल नहीं रहा है. समझ में आया?
Reviewing audit
Yes.
reports.
Yeah, but that's not an administrative activity, na?
Okay.
So what I also do is just a moment, hold on. Hmm? Just a moment, hold on. I also use ChatGPT to study, because I study for CISA, and I can also use it for I also tell people that you can use it as a study buddy. Okay, so let's ask it and see what they have to say. Give me some examples of administrative activities of chief Audit executive. Training हो गया, taking part in initiatives हो गया, being an observer on some committees हो गया, right? Quality assurance, stakeholder relationship management, building and maintaining relationship with key stakeholders, helping with policy procedure development. And then administrative activities of the CA may vary depending on the organization size, industry structure, as well as CA's scope of authority and responsibility as defined by organization leadership and committee. The point that I'm trying to make is you have to utilize these kind of resources to study better. Many a times the examples are limited in the book, right? Or certain things are not explained. You have to go online, thoda research also on your own. Okay. Now, form, content, and review. Interpretation of standard 2040. The form and content of policies and procedures. This is very important. There's a 100 crore of revenue of a company and you are the head of that department. Okay. It's you and there's one more analyst or a fresh chartered accountant that is running that is part of your team. Okay. A regulator comes and says, oh, तुम्हारे पास you've not documented policies and procedures for the audit department. Is the claim valid? Yes. Is the claim valid? अरे कोई तो बोलो फटाफट. Thumbs up क्या? It is valid, Santosh. Why?
Yes, because as part of the
Can't hear you.
administration
Can't hear
activities,
you.
we need to bring the policies and procedures. Otherwise, there is.
Santosh.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can't hear you and your voice is, yeah, your voice is not clear. Maybe you type it in the chat. Anyone else? Anyway, the answer is it is dependent on the size of the organization. For 100 crore revenue company, the operations are so small, right? And the internal audit department is also so small that it does not require policies and procedures, internal audit policies and procedures. So, even if you don't have formal policies and procedures, but if you have some memos explaining how we are going to plan, how we are going to execute, that should be okay, right? So what the form and content, form matlab kya and content matlab, content means what is there inside the policies and procedures. Form means what's the appearance of the policy and procedure. Do I have multiple sections? Is it one memo? What's the form? And what's the content of the policy and procedures depends on various things, na? Size and structure of the internal audit activity and complexity of its work. If it is not that complex, if it is straightforward, right? Then you don't require detailed policies and procedures. Maybe a 4-page document may be sufficient. Clear, Santosh? Thumbs up. Clear, everyone? So the key point here is to, when they give you an example in the exam, your focus should be on what is the size and structure of the activity and what's the complexity of the work. If from the case it is clear that yeah, this is a small organization, the department is also small and it does not require to be this complicated, then the answer is that okay, depending on what the case is, that a memo is also fine. A 3-page document is also fine, which explains the policies and procedures, right? But let's say if we are talking about an MNC spanning operations across the globe, and you're talking about a 30 associate department, internal audit department, and it does not have any policies and procedures explaining how we are going to plan, how we are going to do a risk assessment, how we are going to execute the plan, execute the internal audit engagement, consulting engagements, reporting, follow-up, all of that, then that may be a matter of concern. Okay. A large mature IIA activity may include policies and procedures in a formal operations manual. If the activity is smaller or less mature, policies and procedures may reside in separate documents or an audit management software program. So I remember then when we started, right, when I started as a chartered accountant, and we were sent to these small companies, and let's say we go to the procurement department and we say, where's the policy procedure? They said, no, we don't have any policies and procedures, formal policies and procedures. Then we used to write an observation. Oh, these people don't have any policies and procedure, blah, 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 all of that, right? And then the manager would come and he would say, kya observation hai? We say, yaar, policy and procedure nahi hai. So you will be like, okay, let's talk to the client. The client was, we don't have any formal document. Okay. So then the manager would be, okay, sir, in that case, let's say, for example, purchase order approval. So wo kaise hoga? So then he would pull up an email which has been circulated to everyone that purchase order needs to be approved by these people. Right? Then we would be like, oh, but vendor performance मैनेजमेंट नहीं होता है. ये वुड बी लाइक, अरे 5 तो वेंडर्स है सर, इसमें क्या परफॉर्मेंस मैनेजमेंट करेंगे, राइट? Then we would be like, but what about accounts payable? How do they know what they need to verify when they are looking at the invoices? So then we would be like, he would pull out another email which has gone to the accounts department saying that when you are verifying invoices, take care of these things. Has anyone faced that situation? Yes, no?
No, sort of.
No.
No? कभी ऐसा कोई सिचुएशन ही नहीं हुआ जहाँ पे क्लाइंट ने बोला कि वो नो वी डोंट हैव पॉलिसीज एंड प्रोसीजर्स बट वी हैव सेंट दिस मेल टू पीपल, हियर इज द मेमो और हियर इज 1-page डॉक्यूमेंट. ऐसा तो हुआ होगा ना हरिणी?
No.
अच्छा, नो, ओके, चलो. तो maybe you've not, you've always audited large companies, but and then the manager would remove the observation. And then we would ask him, अरे हाँ, but यार इनके पास कोई approved document वगैरह नहीं है ना. The manager would be, यार इतना छोटा company है, it's such a small company. It is not that complex that you require detailed policies and procedures. And through email, they have circulated the information to everyone who is supposed to know. And it contains everything which they are supposed to know. So there's no key risk here. See my point? Yes or no? Correct? So he would drop that observation. So if the activity is smaller or less mature, policies and procedures may reside in separate documents or an audit management software program. अच्छा, यहाँ पे बात हो रही है इंटरनल ऑडिट डिपार्टमेंट मैनुअल की. Okay, I gave you an example of a procurement department, but I'm saying even in case of internal audit department, because it's a department like every other, the level of detail in a manual depends on how complex is the internal audit department, right? Okay. Like in our company, we have the strength of the department is around 30 associates, 35 associates. So we have a 150 page, no, we have a 250 page manual. It talks about everything. What's our charter? What's our roles and responsibilities? What is our organization structure? How do we do risk assessment? What's the procedure to do risk assessment? How will we plan our engagement? So what emails we will send? How will we announce the audit? Then how will we execute it? Then how we have audit board as a tool for record keeping. So how will audit board work? What do you need to take care when you're operating audit? What everything, right? So it's a 250 page document. Okay. So what content is required or is generally included? Generally included means there can be more or less. But generally, these are the things which are there. It has policies which explain the purpose, compliance with mandatory guidance, independence, ethics requirement, confidentiality, retention of internal audit records. They'll have policies around all of this. What's the difference between policies and procedures? Quickly, anyone?
What to do, how to do.
Sorry?
What to do and how to do.
Very good. Who said that? Ravi or Jasprit?
Ravi sir.
Very good. Exactly. What to do or what is expected is the policy. How to do it is the procedure, right? So policy would say that whenever you are purchasing something above 50,000 rupees, at least 3 quotations should be invited, right? That's the policy. Procedure would be exactly telling you how it needs to be done, which means when you come across a procurement request for, let's say, 1 lakh rupees or anything above 50,000, then a person of this department will discuss it with B and C. Collectively, they will send an email to these vendors, right? The quotations will be received in a sealed envelope. 15 days from the receipt of the quotation, it will be opened up in the presence of X, Y, and Z. This is the format to compare the quotations, right? This is the procedure. Policy sirf bolega what is expected. Policy will say, oh, we expect that there should be 3 quotations. How to get them, how to compare them, how to make that comparative statement. All of that will be in the procedure. Okay. So similarly, in case of an internal auditor's operations manual, the content is usually you have all the policies, then you have the procedures. Okay, how to draft the audit plan, how to prepare the work program, how to document the work done, how to communicate the results, how to monitor and follow up, how to operate our software, how to do data analytics. Those are all procedures. Then it will have guidance on QA/IP also. Quality assurance and improvement plan, that we as auditors also need to constantly improve our own processes and make sure that our quality is proper, right? So there'll be guidance on QA/IP. And there'll be stuff around management of IIA activity. What sort of training? What about CPE requirements? How are we going to manage the performance of the auditors? Things like that. So these should be reviewed periodically, either by CA or an internal audit manager assigned to monitor internal audit processes and emerging issues. So, और एक line डालो. Review of internal audit policies and procedures. Right? And under that CA column, you make a tick, and in the bracket, you say or by an internal audit or delegated to an internal audit manager. Clear? Everyone? ठीक है? So we'll stop here. कल हम लोग HR से pick-up करेंगे. My request is please read this. Please go to the implementation standards. Standards and go through these implementation standards as well. Okay, starting with 2000 series. So wait a minute, 2000 series, 2010, 2000 पूरा पढ़ लो, मतलब only 2000, 2010 नहीं, only 2000. Okay, clear everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Have a great day, guys. And please stick to the plan. Make sure that you study every day. Okay. First thing, make sure that you study for the time that you promise that you will. If for whatever reason you are not able to study, put in those 1 hour or 2 hours that you promised yourself, make sure that you pick up the book and at least read for 15-20 minutes. It will keep you in touch and your streak will be maintained. ठीक है? एक बार मैंने कमिटमेंट कर दी तो मैं खुद की भी नहीं सुनता. Live by that Salman Khan dialogue. I don't like him, but I love this dialogue a lot. Okay? Clear?
Yes.
Chalo, have a great day. Kal milte hain.
Thank you.
And Mohan, make sure that you've downloaded everything. Huh? I'll ask you tomorrow.